It's quite interesting to watch what the unconscious is doing with the fact that it is apparently threatened with a complete end. It disregards it. Life behaves as if it were going on.
Have you ever felt like the ground simply disappeared beneath your feet? As if the world kept spinning, people continued with their routines. But you were trapped in a deafening silence, as if something inside you had died along with the one who left. No one prepares you for this. No one teaches you that grief is not just sadness. It is confusion. It is anger. It is guilt. It is the collapse of what you believed you were. Carl Jung said that the most important experiences in life are not chosen by us. They choose us. And grief is one of them. For Jung, death does not merely represent the end of a life, but the beginning of a profound symbolic process. The loss of someone can activate powerful archetypes within the psyche, leading the soul down a path that, although painful, carries within it the possibility of rebirth. Grief, when experienced with awareness, does not just wound, it transforms. It invites us to a forced pause, a moment where certainties dissolve and, in their place, questions arise that we would never have asked in times of stability. This state of suspension between who we were and who we are not yet is fertile. It is there that the psyche begins to work, silently reorganizing meanings, seeking sense, preparing the ground for a new way of being. Most people will tell you to move on, to occupy your mind, to be strong. But the truth is that ignoring the pain only feeds the emptiness. Jung did not believe in numbing suffering. He believed in going through it, because it is in this process that you find something that has been lost for a long time: yourself. And if you are here, listening to this, it is because you may have already felt that call. Perhaps you have already dreamed of the one who left. You may have felt a presence in the silence. You may have wondered if there is something beyond the pain, some meaning, some purpose. This video is an invitation, not to escape the pain, but to dive into it with awareness, because only those who have the courage to traverse the dark night of the soul find the light that does not come from outside, but from within. If you are ready to face what grief really means, not as an end, but as the beginning of an inner journey, then keep watching, because what you will discover here can transform your relationship with loss, with life, and with yourself. When Carl Jung wrote the Red Book, he was not just formulating a new psychological theory. He was trying not to go insane. He was trying to survive an internal collapse so deep that it almost consumed him completely. After breaking with Freud and witnessing his inner life fragment, Jung voluntarily plunged into a state of confrontation with the unconscious, a process he described as his dark night of the soul. During this period, he did not seek rational answers, but allowed himself to listen to what emerged from the psychic depths, even when those images seemed chaotic, violent, or absurd. And it was in this dive, in this surrender to the unknown, that he understood something essential. Certain pains do not come to be avoided. They come to radically transform us. Grief, from this perspective, is not an emotional accident or an isolated event. It is a symbolic crossing of the soul, a rite of passage that tears us from our previous state of consciousness and hurls us into a new psychic configuration. When we lose someone we deeply love, we do not just lose the person themselves, we also lose the psychic representations they held within us. We lose the symbolic ground. Sometimes that person was the pillar of security, the emotional anchor, the reflection of our childhood, or even the envisioned future we had idealized. Grief deconstructs these foundations, revealing not only the emptiness of absence, but the internal collapse of everything that was unconsciously supported by that bond. And it is precisely in this abyss that transformation begins. An abyss that, although painful and often frightening, is also a portal. Jung believed that intense suffering opens cracks in the ego, and it is through these cracks that the self, the deepest and total instance of the psyche, can finally emerge. Pain, in this sense, is an alchemical agent. It dissolves the old forms of the self, unravels rigid narratives, and pushes the individual toward a new way of being. Like in ancient mythologies, where the hero descends into the underworld to face monsters and returns transformed, the grieving person, if they have the courage to remain conscious within the pain, undergoes an initiatory journey. They die to what they were and are reborn as something truer, more whole, more real. Death, as an archetype, has a psychic function. It represents the breaking of cycles, the interruption of patterns, the end of internal structures that no longer serve the evolution of the soul. And grief, as a manifestation of this symbolic death, is the process that reorganizes the psyche from this break. Emotional disorganization, helplessness, the feeling of losing meaning, all of this is part of a deep dynamic that is in motion within us. The soul is trying to heal, but for that, it first needs to dismantle itself. That is why Jung did not see grief as pathology. He recognized it as a sacred moment, an inevitable stage in the journey of individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are. But this process requires something that our modern culture has unlearned: presence, silence, listening. Not the listening from the outside, but the internal listening that connects us with what is most authentic and, often, most painful within us. Fleeing from grief is like interrupting a spiritual birth. It is wanting to leave the cave before the eyes adjust to the darkness. It is refusing to be born again. And every refusal of transformation comes at a price. Either the suffering is somatized, or it repeats itself disguised in other relationships, in other cycles of loss, in other voids. But what happens when we try to resist this process? When we cannot bear to lose control and seek to rationalize or suppress the pain? In the next part, we will dive precisely into this point: the illusion of control, and how the unconscious responds to this attempt at denial. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. We live in an era that idolizes control. From an early age, we are conditioned to organize, plan, manage, and anticipate. We believe that if we try hard enough, we can manage not only our commitments, but also our emotions, our relationships, and even the course of our existence. Culture teaches us that vulnerability is weakness, and that feeling too much is a kind of deviation from the norm. We create routines, lists, methods, and distractions to protect ourselves from the unpredictable. But then comes death, that silent presence, which does not ask for permission, which does not respect schedules, which arrives with the coldness of absolute events. And with it, everything that seemed solid collapses. Death destroys the illusion of control with surgical precision, and when it arrives, it brings with it a devastating revelation. We are radically powerless in the face of certain forces of life. No matter how much we prepare, no matter how hard we try to keep everything under control, there are events that bring us to our knees. For Jung, this collapse of the ego is not a mistake to be corrected. It is a calling, a forced invitation, yes, but deeply necessary for us to connect with what truly governs our lives, the unconscious. During mourning, the unconscious ceases to be a silent backdrop and becomes the protagonist. The rational structure that once organized our experience is weakened. And it is in this space of fragility that previously repressed content begins to emerge forcefully. Intense dreams, memories that seemed forgotten, disproportionate emotional impulses, nameless anxieties. All of this is the language of the soul trying to be heard, and it does not speak in logical sentences. It speaks in symbols, images, sensations. If we try to suffocate or rationalize this movement, we are resisting the very process of healing. Jung taught that the unconscious is wiser than the ego, although its wisdom does not follow common logic. It is not an enemy. It is a partner. Mysterious, yes, often frightening, but essential for the psyche to become more whole. And mourning, with its archetypal weight, is one of the most fertile situations for this dialogue to occur. Therefore, the emotions that arise during this period, anger, guilt, fear, deep sadness, should not be controlled or judged. They are messages. They are signs that something very important is trying to reorganize itself within us. However, we have been taught to resist, to be strong, to move on as quickly as possible. The performance culture has turned even mourning into a goal to be achieved, a symbolic deadline to return to normalcy. And so, we push the pain into the depths of the unconscious, along with everything it carries and could reveal to us. But repressed pain does not disappear. It transforms into symptoms, emotional blockages, and patterns of repetition that trap us in silent cycles of suffering. What we avoid now manifests later, with more intensity and less clarity. That is why Jung saw dreams as precious allies in this process. When the ego can no longer bear the weight of experience, the unconscious comes into play with its symbolic language. Dreams become channels of psychic elaboration, where what is unbearable in reality can be slowly digested in layers through images that carry deep meanings. In mourning, these dreams not only process the loss, they often offer comfort, closure, and even reconnection with those who have passed, in a symbolic dimension that challenges common logic, but resonates with a deep emotional truth. And that is what we will talk about in the next part, how dreams become messengers of the soul in times of loss, and how in them we can archetypally and transformatively reconnect with those who have departed.